Well, joining us to speak and shed more light on the BRICS Summit and what it all entails is Gustavo Di Carvalho. He is a political analyst and senior researcher. Gustavo, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes. Is there anything at all for African countries, to gain from the BRICS Summit? We've seen, of course, South Africa as an African country as a host, and quite a number of African countries sending their leaders or representatives to this summit. What can Africans take away from this group?
I think there is quite a few potentials for the African continent, and particularly when we're looking into the continent implementing the African Continental Free Trade Area. And when we see, for instance, the speech of President Ramaphosa this morning, which was almost entirely focused on what is in it for Africa. And I think that is particularly important in the context where there's very serious discussion at the moment regarding the expansion of the group. And we know there is a number of African countries that have expressed some interest in that, and potentially identifying mechanisms that can bring BRICS much closer to our continental mechanisms within the continent. A lot of the discussions here in Johannesburg have been about the issue about complementarity of economies, but particularly when it comes to increasing the added value of the exports that African countries are doing. So I think there is a very good potential for the continent, but I think it will still be very important to see what are the final outcomes that will be presented tomorrow.
Right. From the deliberations, Gustavo, by the BRICS leaders so far, I mean, we have several other multinational, multilateral groupings. How do you think they want to make BRICS different from those other multilateral groups? We have the G7, and we have also groups from the African continent and the Asian continent and all that. What is different about BRICS?
I think the one interesting thing about BRICS is that at the moment we have 5 countries that are very different from one another. And I think it's always important to state that, because it's not that the BRICS members see the world in the same ways. It's not that they agree on everything. So they tend to choose a fairly narrow scope in terms of areas in which they agree with one another. And the main one is this collective frustration that despite them being very relevant countries, big economies, quite influential in their own regions, and still then they're quite marginalized in a lot of decision making, particularly within international financial institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. So we've seen in the last couple of years BRICS creating a number of institutions. Probably the most visible one is the New Development Bank, what many call as the BRICS Bank, that is already starting to provide financing to a lot of infrastructure and other types of investments for the BRICS members. So I think to a large degree, I think what BRICS do is to bring those very unusual partners to claim and to demand for a stronger space. And that is precisely the reason why we think that we've seen so many different developing economies showing interest to join BRICS, either in a full capacity or even as just part of what we call as the BRICS Plus, one of the different structures that have been created to make BRICS a little bit more inclusive.
All right, very interesting times. We know that the Russian Federation is going through one of the most trying times in its post-Soviet history. And of course, Putin could not attend that summit. It remains to be seen whether, this will have an impact. But thank you very much, Gustavo Di Carvalho, political analyst and senior researcher, for your time.
Thank you very much.